Hello, beautiful alchemist. Welcome to Reiki Radio. I am your host, Yolanda. And today we are going to have a very interesting conversation about our soul purpose, our soul's path from the lens of true sidereal astrology. Now, I know that many of you are familiar with astrology to some degree, and there are different systems of it in different ways that we can look at our birth charts and our personal blueprints. And recently, sidereal has come up quite a bit, but it is slightly different than what a lot of us are used to in Western astrology, which is what would be considered tropical. So today we have a conversation with an incredible astrologer named Athen Chimenti, and he is an astrologer, an educator, and a leading expert in the field of true sidereal astrology. He is dedicated to spreading the word about true sidereal and how powerful it is at bringing clarity and direction to people's lives. Athen has helped more than 5,000 people from around the world to gain clarity through his astrology readings, and he has taught more than 100 astrologers how to become professionals in the field and thousands more through his video course. So we really do break this down. And thankfully, he makes it very clear, understandable, ingestible, but also gives us this understanding how both systems, both tropical and sidereal, are accurate and useful. They just give us different lenses of ourselves. So this may be very interesting for you personally, especially when considering um, the the highlights of what your personal soul purpose may be or look like. And thankfully, Athen has provided a 50% off discount for the reports from his website. So you can get your True Sidereal full report on his website for 50% off. You just use the link down in the show description. Aside from that, you can get a free portion of the report on his website as well, which is masteringthezodiac.com. So all of that is down in the show notes. I also want to remind you, it's coming up very quickly, that we will be starting the alchemy circle. So if this is something you've been thinking about, you want to get a little more serious about your practice, you want to go deeper into your understanding of energetic alchemy, it is a year-long commitment, but it is incredible. And you have access to all of the recordings as long as your membership is active. So even if you can't join us live, you can go through all that we go through in your own time. So you can learn more about that on my website, theenergeticalchemist.com. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and I will see you on the other side. Okay, everyone, we are here today with Athen Chimenti. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation today.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Londa.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I was telling you before we started, I really do enjoy your interpretation in terms of astrology. And I'm excited that you're going to teach us about sidereal astrology because I don't know that a lot of people are as familiar with this. So before we go too deep into the conversation, I just want to first ask how you personally fell in love with astrology and what is your relationship to reading the stars?
Yeah, so I was never really someone into the woo-woo stuff of modern day spirituality and stuff. Always very left brain, and if I was to be convinced of something, like you would have to convince me from like a very scientific,
Mm.
perspective. So for most of my life, actually, if someone were to bring up something like astrology, I probably would have enjoyed the debate of saying that that's probably not the truth. But I've always been into personal development, and eventually that personal development led to meditation. And uh, I started meditating quite a bit in my late 20s and kind of removed myself from society, actually, living in this sort of homestead out in the middle of the desert in Death Valley. And after, months of this meditation, quite deeply, I started to become aware of obviously there's more to life than the five senses. And I had what you could call a spiritual awakening, seeing life from just a much more vast perspective than I ever could have before. And that really opened me up to things that, I otherwise wouldn't have been into. So I started to get into different, mediums, different ways of kind of looking at life from a more metaphysical perspective. And astrology was the one that really stood out to me the most. And I think the reason is it's like good for my personality being more kind of like I still want to see things verified. I still want to see it tangibly and actually be able to compare it to what's going on. And astrology really speaks to me in that sense because you can, go and see exactly where the planets are. And that interpretation, of course, is subjective, but at least it's grounded in what you can, see visibly. So I got really excited about astrology, started looking at it for myself, obviously, friends, and then YouTube. And this was during the YouTube heydays when you could just publish any video and get like 20,000 likes right off the bat. And so I was very lucky to start doing that with astrology. And so the channel just grew very quickly. And that enabled me to start doing it professionally. And so I started doing it professionally and the ball started moving. And here we are 12 years later and very lucky to be doing this, professionally. I did start with just tropical. So tropical, we can explain the difference there, but that's the mainstream system basically. And, like most astrologers started with that. But as I started to, well, one day I just kind of like was using this app, these apps came out at the time where you could just hold your phone up and see, what sign, in this case, the full moon was. So I was like, I knew about sidereal, but it didn't really hit me until I saw it. And so I was expecting to see like a full moon in Gemini because that's the mainstream, sign. But when I went out to look at it, it was actually in Taurus. And I could see Taurus and there's the full moon like right smack in the middle of it. And so when it really hit me like that, from that point onward, I started to, use sidereal.
Mhm.
I started with regular sidereal and then true sidereal, which is, what I use today, which is the actual size of the constellations. But that's when it really started to become something that I felt like I was really contributing to. Um, it is kind of crazy that we are so far in the future from when astrology started, and so many of us don't even know that we're not using the visible sky. But you know, I'm very fortunate to have basically technology because I think it's really the technology that allowed for us to be able to use true sidereal, the actual size of the constellations. And yeah, so here I am today, educating people as much as I can about it, and of course doing all the astrology stuff like readings and all that
Yeah.
with true sidereal.
Okay. So there's so many questions I have for you already, but I do want us to go into the difference between tropical and sidereal, and then what you're also saying is true sidereal, so people understand. But before we go into those differences, could you give us a little bit of how someone who was so skeptical, and then I understand having mystical experience often brings us into a different lens of curiosity, but was there something um, about astrology? Was it that you had a reading and it was so true to who you were? Or what is it about it that you think can really support us in practical ways? Like, why do you think astrology is useful for just all of us to maybe have an understanding about, or at least our own charts?
Yeah, exactly, totally. Yeah, that's it. I mean, it to me, it's such a great tool for self-awareness.
Mm,
So that's where it started for me. Like, when you don't have these tools, thinking back to that, it's like life is very difficult, at least for me, in terms of like knowing like who I am, what I want, why am I doing this? Really, like, I can understand at the time that I had certain characteristics, but it
right.
didn't really hit home for me until I started to get into these systems. And of course, there's others. Like I'm still very much drawn to like psychological systems, like MBTI or socionics, or there's so many different ways of looking at the self. But astrology, yeah, really stood out to me because it seemed to show it on a more deeper level. The level that I like to say it is it's like the life path level.
Mm,
So, and this is how I do my readings too. I focus at this point almost exclusively on the life path. Being able to see like what is life helping us develop? What is our kind of purpose here in the sense of what are we here to learn? What are we here to grow? What are our challenges? What are we here to kind of evolve the soul with? And more importantly, then it's like, okay, well, once we know that, then how do we actually apply it? And that's where I really love it because then it's like, okay, so yeah, these are my characteristics. This is my life path. But, with astrology, now you can really start to develop these systems around okay, well, here's what we figured out are some of the best ways of going about this, or here are some of the best ways of aligning to the life path. And then it's quite miraculous, quite crazy that, like, you start living your life in alignment with this so-called life path, and you just see how many things are like flowing when you do, flowing when you're not. You're challenged at certain times, and you can tell why. It's just not, life is difficult to navigate on its own, but astrology does make it easier to be able to say, okay, like I'm understanding more about why I'm facing this challenge right now. I'm understanding more about how to navigate this particular challenge. And that's really been the biggest benefit, both in terms of becoming more self-aware, but also how to navigate the life energy. So that's where I really like to focus in my readings is, okay, here's your life path. Yeah, here's what you're working with. But more importantly, here's how to align to it very practically so that you can have a very fulfilling, clear, gives a lot of clarity, direction in life, and just all in all, more fulfillment when we're living more in alignment like that.
yeah, I think it's really interesting you bring this up, Athen. I was just telling a friend of mine just the other day that I think astrology really helped me to be more curious about myself because I think one of the things a lot of us don't realize is yes, we'll say our blueprint, our truest essence may be there, but we're often raised in the boundaries of our parents or our caregivers, whoever raised us, they usually try to shape us from whatever their lens may be. And so we don't all have, I would say, like the full freedom, so to speak, to really explore or get to know what may seem more true to us. And so then if you meet an astrologer and then now someone is explaining to you what your tendencies may be, it can bring about a curiosity of, wow, well, maybe I need to explore this part of myself, or maybe have an understanding of why I feel more drawn to these things over here, but I've been focusing on what I thought I should do type of thing. So to me, it can be very life changing in that regard, but also with understanding the differences with the people around us. Because I think, not really, I think I know I was more critical of people that I didn't understand. And then astrology and understanding our different makeup helped me to be more accepting of, oh, well, no, we don't all think alike. And yeah, we all have different, I don't know, interests, whatever it may be. Did you have any of that come up for you when you started?
Yeah, for sure. That's actually a big one that I don't really give enough credit to is like how much it opened my perspective about other people and like their journey. Like it's very easy for me to be very opinionated about like, oh, you should do this or you should do that or this is right or this is right. And once you start to look at the chart and you realize it's not like that for everybody. In fact,
Right.
what's actually one good thing for one person is not good for the other person.
Yeah.
Because the chart's a circle, and I mean, you're just kind of simplifying this, but like, it's a circle, and like, let's say your life path's going in this direction, and like someone's got it going in the complete opposite direction, and so even something that's like good advice generally can actually be bad advice depending on the person that you're talking to. But yeah, but just all in all, just being more open-minded, I think about like, okay, well, this, more and more with astrology, I become more and more aware, like, okay, this person's bringing this to the table. This is what they're bringing, to the collective and the world. This is because they have these strengths. Yeah, they're going to have these challenges, or yeah, they've got these maybe tendencies that I might have negative value judgments about, but that means that they also have these very positive ones that I could be more open to.
Right.
And then it's like on a deeper level, it's like we are the whole zodiac. Like everybody is the full spectrum, right? And
Yeah.
I think the ideal is for us to live in the middle of the wheel, in the middle of the chart, to balance out all these qualities in the healthiest way possible. So then, yeah, and then with interactions, it's like, okay, I become much more open-minded in the sense that like in every interaction, it's like someone has something to teach me and I have
Yes.
something to learn. And I also, of course, have something to share. And it just becomes a much more like open and engaging way of interacting with others. And it's everybody, so it becomes more universal and more open like that instead of like, yeah, so conceptual or putting things into boxes or people into boxes like I've done in the past.
Yeah, I agree. I That's one of the reasons I love it too, is because of that. It really gave me that curiosity and openness about our differences, but also the different archetypes of the signs and like, oh, well, what could I learn from this regardless of what's on my chart? So let's get into really what astrology is. Okay, so what is it? And then what is the difference between looking at it through the lens of tropical and then sidereal? Could you explain just so people understand? Because they're probably like, what are they talking about? Tropical and
Yeah, totally.
sidereal. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So I think the simplest way of saying it is so mainstream astrology in the West. So this is like 99% of what's online and media and stuff like this is what we call tropical. Now we would think that this mainstream system, all of our sun signs and all this, we think naturally that this is where, for example, the sun was when we were born. So if you're an Aquarius out there listening, or you're an Aries out there listening, or whatever your sign is, it's safe to assume that that's where the sun was. But the truth is that that's not actually the case most of the time. Okay, so like more than three-quarters of the time, that's actually not the case when you're using True Sidereal. The sun was actually in a different constellation, and it's usually in the constellation before. So for those Aquarians, such as yourself, Yolanda, the sun was actually in Capricorn. Or if you are that Aries, this is, a big one. Your sun's actually in Pisces, and that's like a huge paradigm shift there. But
Yeah.
the sun is actually not in these mainstream signs when we were born. Now, that doesn't mean to say that it's not accurate. Um, Basically, what the tropical system is that roughly about 2,000 years ago, we fixed the zodiac around the seasons, and that's why it's called tropical. It's based around the seasons. And to make everything much easier and simpler, and in many ways at the time more accurate, we said, okay, look, instead of making all these calculations, because it's very difficult to actually track the sun, believe it or not, because the sun doesn't actually return to the same point in the sky every year.
Mhm.
So this is why in tropical it stays fixed. And so no matter what, like your birthday is, it's like everyone born on that birthday for the end of time will have that same sun sign. But the truth is that the sun doesn't actually return to the same spot every year. And this is called precession, if you want to get technical and look it up. But basically, it means that there's a growing variation between tropical and where the sun actually is. So, for example, 2,000 years ago, we started tropical. And so there we fixed Aries to the spring equinox. So that's the late March, we start Aries. It's been that way for the past 2,000 years since we fixed it to that. But because of precession, because of this slight movement of the sun every year relative to the seasons, we're now that full sign difference, sometimes up to two sign difference that we were talking about earlier. So that's the difference between tropical and sidereal. Tropical is the seasonal system established about 2,000 years ago. Simplifies everything so it stays fixed to the Gregorian calendar, to the seasonal calendar. And it's still accurate because you are still taking the wheel of life, which is what the zodiac is. The zodiac is just, another expression of the wheel of life. And so you're taking this wheel of life and you're overlaying it on top of the seasons. And you're saying if you're born during certain times of the seasons, you're going to exhibit certain qualities.
Right.
So that's obviously very true. And that's, a big reason why I think tropical is so accurate is it's just, it's the wheel of life overlaid on the seasons. So it's its own system. But it's important to differentiate tropical from what we call sidereal astrology, which is where you are starting to take into account precession. You are using as close to the actual location for all the planets in the sky when someone was born. And this is where we have like this huge variation between tropical and sidereal. So the seasonal system and what you could say the sky system. Sidereal is like, referencing the sky. But to complicate things even further, sidereal, like tropical, uses an even 30 degrees for all the signs.
Hmm.
Okay. And that's just like in tropical. It's like that's why it's about a month, but it's like the same amount of time for all the signs. But if you do look up at the sky, you will see that the constellations are different sizes. So, for example, that Aries we talked about is very small. Pisces is very large. Leo
Oh,
is large, Cancer is small, Virgo is large, Libra is small. So you have different amounts of time that the sun or any other planet are in these constellations. So this is what we now take into account with true sidereal. So with true sidereal, we're saying, okay, we want to use the true size of the constellations. So this is literally like you go outside, and if you use the constellations that we use, the Virgo, etc., you want to see exactly where those planets are. So that's the true sidereal system. So we have tropical, which is seasonal. We have sidereal, which is the sky, but everything, all the signs are 30 degrees still. Okay. And then you have true sidereal, where you've got uneven sizes, which is more of the astronomical or visible sky, using those.
that's really interesting. So it sounds like what you're saying, it could take the sun longer to go through one sign over the other instead of having this fixed amount of time that we're used to of approximately 30 days. So there could be like a
Yeah.
shorter window to be born under the in the constellation of Aries versus that bigger window for people who may be born as Pisces. That's
Right.
really interesting.
Yeah. And that kind of opens up what we were saying earlier, that like you have different portions of the population with more signs over others, right? So
Right.
you can also look at it as okay, maybe since Virgo is a larger constellation, maybe we do need more Virgo energy collectively, right?
Hmm.
And this isn't just for the, sun sign. Obviously, we have all the other signs. So all the other planets, the
Right.
sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, etc. These are all in signs too. But it's basically saying that, like, yeah, certain qualities are maybe more needed, like in mass or in quantity, in the world than others, and starts to open up kind of ideas too about like, okay, what are these signs about collectively? Why are some smaller and some larger? Why are, there's more of one type than the other type? And then it starts to even get more dynamic in terms of what those signs or energies are about developing. And it also tells you that certain signs are more difficult to develop because when we do have these transits, transits are an opportunity to develop that sign's energy. So, for example, like, we might have Saturn in like Pisces in tropical, or Saturn in Aquarius in sidereal right now. And if Aquarius is kind of a medium size, but like when Saturn goes into Pisces, and Pisces is a very large constellation, Pisces is large because it's difficult and it takes time to develop. So if we need to develop this, in this case, Saturn energy, we need much more time to develop the Pisces energy of Saturn
Hmm.
than we do the Aquarius energy. So a lot starts to open up when we are using those actual sizes. Yeah.
Very interesting. So again, I could ask you 10,000 things, but I want us to keep going. But one of the things I'm curious about now, I just want to ask, when we talk Western, again, just to clarify for people, it's usually run through the system that we call tropical, which is more fixed. But then say like Vedic astrology, that's more, they use sidereal, right? And
Correct.
then,
Yeah.
so this also with the system that you use with the true sidereal, is there a difference in the mythology? So, for example, like with Western astrology, you may hear a lot of stories with connection to like Greek or Roman mythology. Does sidereal use different characters, different archetypes for the different signs, or the different stories associated with the
Yeah.
signs?
Right, it's a great question. So for the most part, it's the same. It's the same. But there's one exception, and that's the 13th sign.
Mm.
Okay. So we So now let's go back 4,000 years. 4,000 years ago, we started to make the zodiac as we know it today, like as in the even 30 degrees kinds
Mhm.
of thing. And this is, at a time when we were making calendars and clocks. So it made sense at the time to simplify everything to 30 degrees each, right? Because imagine a calendar where like one month is substantially larger than another,
Right.
or in a clock where 1 hour is, larger than another. So I think their purpose there was for timing, right? They wanted to come up with calendars and clocks, and so it made sense to kind of simplify everything and make everything an even 30 degrees, right? Um, like we've already pointed out, there's different sizes, but there's also an extra constellation. So there's a whole extra constellation that was removed from the nice even 12, 30 degrees system. And so this is a fucus, the serpent bearer.
Mm.
Um, Arguably the most important sign. I'm not comparing, but it's extremely important, extremely energetic. Um, Basically, we have the center of the galaxy, the Milky Way. For those who've been lucky to see it, it's that band of stars that we see. We see it sometimes in pictures and stuff, that really strong band of stars across the sky. That's the center of our Milky Way, the center of our galaxy that the whole solar system is revolving around. So we place a lot of emphasis on our sun. And like in astrology, that's like an extremely important planet, right? The sun, like with tropical and all this. But we don't place enough, in my opinion, emphasis on the galactic sun, the
Mhm.
center of the Milky Way that we're all revolving around. So that's where a fucus is. So right at the end of a fucus is the galactic center, extremely energetic part of the sky. It deals with transformation. For those that know Scorpio, it's the same energy as Scorpio, and that's what it was kind of not replaced with, but they extended Scorpio and removed a fucus. So it's the same similar energy that deals with depth, truth, transformation, death and rebirth, psychology, healing, the esoteric, all the hidden, deeper world. But it comes after Scorpio when you look at the ecliptic. So the ecliptic is
Mhm.
the path of the planets. Scorpio goes over the ecliptic first, and then a fucus passes over the ecliptic second, again, right before the galactic center. So this is what we would say is like the next evolution of Scorpio, in the sense that like every sign is again the evolution of life. So we go from Aries to Pisces, and that's like the whole life cycle. But even within certain signs, there's an evolution. So, for example, the beginning of Aries is, more of a fundamental or base layer to the later part of Aries, because we're evolving that Aries energy like a spectrum as we go through it.
Mhm.
So we do the same thing for that part of the sky with Scorpio and Fucus. So where Scorpio brings things to the surface. So Scorpio, the scorpion, is about unearthing, uncovering. We know that about, mainstream astrology as well. But Ophiuchus takes it one step further, which is like, okay, once it's been unearthed, now let's work with it. Or what the Ophiuchus, the constellation is, it's the serpent bearer. So it's the person holding the serpent, and it's standing on top of Scorpio, which is saying that we're raising the serpent, or even standing on top of or raising the scorpion,
Mhm.
which is once you have awareness of that deeper world, let's actually work with it. So this is why it's given the healer archetype. I like to think of it as the redeemer, the one who accepts all aspects of life, the shadow of life, if you will, with Jungian psychology. And through that acceptance of the shadow or the exiled parts of ourselves, we become more of our true self. We become more whole. We become more individuated, as the Jungians would say, more of our true self, which is that full spectrum I was talking about earlier. So yeah, so extremely important constellation. Once we've done this, then we go into Sagittarius. So Sagittarius is after the galactic center. That's after we've transformed, we've gone to the abyss, we emerge out the other side, the free spirit of Sagittarius. Very much like the butterfly out of the cocoon.
Mhm.
Scorpio to Fucus are that metamorphosis in the cocoon, and then Sagittarius is the free spirit on the other side. So, yeah, so that was removed. And we hear a lot of taboo about the number 13. We see 13 repeated a lot in mythology. 13 being an extremely powerful number in the sense of like Like in the West, I would say the most prominent is like Christ. So Christ is the 13th with the 12
Right.
disciples. This is all very symbolic for that redeemer quality. We have to redeem that full spectrum of life to evolve to that next stage of consciousness or personal development that I think Ophiuchus is helping us do.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So first of all, when you're describing that, it reminds me of the way that I learned similarly that evolution within Scorpio of being the scorpion that evolves to the serpent that evolves to the eagle. So it's really interesting this comparison or insertion of Ophiuchus. So if you run
Mhm.
someone's chart, is it that sometimes that's what someone's sign is? And they
Yeah,
usually are born around that the season that we would be familiar with in terms of Scorpio season.
close. So Ophiuchus season is December 7th to December 18th. That's
Oh.
about the time that the sun is in Ophiuchus at the moment. Um, so this is, of course, just the sun sign.
Hmm.
There's other signs too. So someone might have their moon in a fucus, which is equally as powerful, equally as important as the sun there. But if we want to look at just the sun signs, yeah, if you're born between December 7th and December 18th, then the sun was in a fucus. And this would mean that you view life. The sun is how we view life, how we express ourselves. So it's more of the outer world, how we view the outer world. So this would mean that you view life through the lens of what can be healed, what can be redeemed, what can be accepted. So not only the deeper world, but again, a great opportunity to work with it. We do see a lot of people in the medical fields with this kind of sun sign and other signs in the fucus. Obviously, a lot of spiritual practitioners, a lot who are into the occult and then want to express it and share it with the world, whether it's through their podcast or writings or things like this. Basically, we see the expression of that energy we just talked about with individuals with their sun signs there.
Yeah. Okay. So because of the way that you're describing this too, I'm curious, is it possible that someone born this year versus someone who was born maybe 5 years ago, even if they were born on the same date, would they still have the same sign? Or would it depend on,
Yeah.
okay. So
Yeah. So
it's not it's
that,
fixed, but not I mean it's not fixed, but it's still fits within that framework of our
yeah,
year. Okay.
totally. Yeah. So it's not fixed, but it's very, very subtle change.
Okay.
Um, so because remember, so we said 2000 years ago,
Hmm.
they were the same. 2000 now, they've only changed about 24 degrees.
Okay.
So that's about the sign difference that we are talking about.
So for me, for example, I think my sun is 2 or 3 degrees in Aquarius in tropical. So because I'm at the very beginning of Aquarius in tropical, that's why I would fall into Capricorn and sidereal. But if I were more towards the end of Aquarius, it's possible that in sidereal I would still be Aquarius.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You're more likely to be the same sign if you're in the later degrees of that sign. Just keep in mind that, of course, since we're using true sidereal, that's not always the case
Yeah.
because, again, these constellations are different sizes. It is always the case for regular sidereal,
Hmm.
like that, late degree would mean the same.
Right.
But with true sidereal, yeah, sometimes you can be up to two signs different. So, like with true sidereal, there's actually a lot of those that think there's, or well, let me just say those the tropical Scorpios out there that are actually Virgos,
Hmm.
and so it's actually like skipped a whole other sign of Libra, and that's a huge difference too. So,
Wow.
but for the most, if you're in a late degree, then um, there's a greater chance that you're the same in both.
Okay, Athen, we have to talk about this because I know some people are probably freaking out, as I did, to know my chart as I'm Aquarius, Aquarius rising, Pisces moon, Mercury and Capricorn. And then to see this version sidereally, now all of a sudden I'm Capricorn, Capricorn rising, I think Aquarius moon, and then my Mercury's in Sagittarius, right? That's a lot to kind of wrap your head around. So, but I did still look at what the expression of these were. And I could see how I really do have traits of both. So I could see how I could relate to the tropical and to the sidereal. So could you talk a little bit about that? Because there may be some people, say, for example, a Scorpio listening going, there is no way I'm like a Virgo. So could you talk about, even for yourself, when you learned whatever your imprint was tropically, how did that compare to what you learned from the sidereal?
Yeah, so like I said, I still find the tropical accurate.
Yeah.
Um, what this comes down to is it comes down to like I was talking about those different systems, MBTI psychology. There's so many different ways of looking at the self, right? So many different angles. Um, the true self is, like I said, is in the center. It's balanced between all these qualities.
Hmm.
So what I think the chart is showing us is it's showing us what we're here to grow with, like I was saying earlier. So now what you have is different perspectives of that. Where are you growing, um, based on whatever perspective you're looking at? So, for example, tropical is based around the seasons. Now, this is not the original chart, so not bashing tropical, but it's very important to point out that tropical is not the sky.
Hmm.
Okay. So the traditional chart is the sky. This is where astrology was all birthed from. It's where the constellations were created. It was the visible sky. So the way I like to look at it is true sidereal is the fundamental journey for the soul. Okay. That's why we hear sidereal being interpreted as more of like the spiritual journey or the soul's journey. Okay.
Hmm.
But I think, looking at it as the fundamental chart in the sense of this soul's growth and development. Now, from that chart, from the original sky, you can create derivative charts. Now, by derivative, I don't mean it's any less than or anything. We use derivative charts in astrology all the time. The progress chart is a great example. It's derived from the original and it gives us a tremendous amount of value. So I think it's important to look at the tropical chart as a derivative, not less, but as looking at it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
What that perspective is I think it is the more physical self and the more physical experiences when we say that the soul is here to learn and develop in a certain way. I think this becomes very much our visible and physical reality through the tropical
Mm.
chart. And again, that's why it's so accurate, is you can see things very prominently in the tropical chart, like the ascendant, for example, is extreme. For example, the ascendant in tropical is actually far more precise about the physical appearances of someone than the sidereal chart. So, for example, for me, I'm a tropical Gemini. I do a lot of talking in my work. You can see I'm like talking with my hands a lot. I'm a Gemini in the way that I sort of present myself in the world physically. But I'm a Taurus in true sidereal rising. Now, you're not going to see a Taurus in me, I don't think. So Taurus, by the way, for those that don't know, is very grounded, more reserved, more kind of resourceful, like to take things one step at a time. Now, having said that, me looking at my life experiences, I can tell you 100% that what life has been trying to get me to develop throughout my life is to become more of a Taurus, to become more self-reliant, to become more resourceful, to become more grounded. I was not born with this energy. I don't present myself physically in this way, but this is by far, for me, what resonates is this is what I'm here to learn about. This is what I'm here to grow about. The ascendant is what we are destined to become. It's what's rising when we were born. Okay, so you can see that obviously that's saying that, tropical is still just as accurate. It's a great example of the ascendant. But that's what I think the tropical is. It's more of the physical self. And that's why, again, the sun sign, especially with
Mhm.
tropical, is extremely accurate, because it's showing that physical self. I think the reason is because like the way the Hindus kind of described it is like we are in this, I think, wheel of karma. Um, and the wheel of karma is always described as something that is fixed. You can escape it, but the wheel itself is this consistent, you're going around and around and around, experiencing the same things over and over again. And that is how the tropical chart is. Like I said, without precession, every date on a year, it's going to be that sign regardless till the end of time,
Yeah.
even though it is actually changing in the sky. So, yeah. put simply, tropical, very good for the physical life lessons, physical experiences, physical self,
Mhm.
and true sidereal more, I think, in terms of the, let's say, soul's evolution.
I love that description, especially too, because I think it again gives us this perspective of even how dynamic we are, like how layered we are. So thank you so much for explaining that because again, a lot of people go, well, which one? What is right? What is true, right? But I love that way of seeing how they both contribute to understanding, having a broader lens of our expression. So
Yeah.
another thing, oh, go ahead.
And I was just going to add, like, to make it even simpler, like, just do what resonates with you. Like, there's no
Hmm.
right or wrong system, right?
Right.
And everything's crossing your path when it needs to cross your path. So if true sidereal is crossing your path right now, or regular sidereal is crossing your path, and it's not resonating, it's just, you don't need it. You don't need
Hmm.
it. So don't worry about it. Just go with what resonates, because everything is there for specific purpose, I think, along our life journey. And even
Yeah.
astrology itself is not something everyone needs. In fact, I don't think most would need astrology. It's a great tool. It's there. Tools are great, but we don't always need every tool all the time. So yeah, just go with what resonates. It's not about like right or wrong or like making a mistake if you don't do it this way or choosing one. If you're cool with it, do multiple. Like look if you can, look at yourself from this lens and that lens and maybe, see how each one's benefiting you in certain ways. But there's no need to kind of like pigeonhole yourself to fit anything or just
Mhm.
pick one thing and just kind of, stick to that. It's just use whatever's crossing your path at the time and what's resonating for you at that time.
Yeah, I think you're right with that, Athen. Sometimes it's just timing. So, for example, one of the first astrologers I ever went to, I was in my 20s, so this was over 20 years ago. And she was very accurate with, timing in terms of certain events that happened in my life, which was a little spooky actually. But in terms of how she described me, um, again, there were aspects of myself I wasn't yet familiar with. So I was, a little resistant to some of the things that she said. But then 10 years later, I went to see her again. And at that time, because of what was going on in my life, I was more open and at least curious about what she had said. And I'm so thankful that that happened because it did help me to learn some other layers. And then to your point, even with this, when I first heard about sidereal and then hearing that I was potentially like under Capricorn influence, I was very resistant to that initially. But then when I softened around that, again, the differences in the charts, I was able to then recognize like, oh, I could see how both of these are true of me and who I am. And so I'm really glad you say that. Um, Another thing though, I have to ask you, and I was telling you this before we started recording. I've watched you do weekly like predictions on YouTube. You talk about what we can expect in the upcoming week, the week ahead. But what I really love is the way that you translate what's going on with the stars. And I just want to point out this is very important because I think sometimes you could have, two astrologers translating the exact same thing, but in very different ways. And some people's ways could not necessarily resonate with you. And then you think that's the voice or the language of the system itself, when really it's the voice of the astrologer. So I just want to clarify, you know, everyone may interpret or translate these same transits and what's going on very differently, and you do it beautifully. So I was just curious, is there like a bit of intuition that flows through when you're doing these readings, or you're just great at your
Yeah.
description? Like, where does that come from for you?
Oh, thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Yolanda. Um, Yeah, I mean, I think Bernadette Brady describes it great. So she's a tropical astrologer. She's one of my favorites, extremely accurate. I learned so much from her specifically for predictive work.
Hmm.
And I think she describes it great. She says that, the actual tool, like what we're doing with astrology itself, like just these signs and all this, are they more, let's say, scientific, more practical. They're kind of the bedrock on which we stand, right? Because in order to read a chart, you have to, know your signs, you have to know the planets, you have to know these kind of basic uh, principles. But once you have that basic principle, you have to rely on your intuition. You have to rely on what part of the chart you want to look at. I mean, there's so much you could look at, so many different ways you could look at. Now, obviously, a person's personality, everything is filtered through my perspective of life. And so I'm going to have my own unique personality and perspective on everything. But when it comes to purely astrology, I like to try to remove myself from the equation as much as possible. So I'm not thinking of it as like, oh, this is my preference coming through in the reading. I try to avoid that as much as possible from my
Mhm.
perspective. I'm trying to be as objective as I can about things. But when I am approaching it that way in the most objective way, that's how I see it. So Brady talks about it as the eagle and the lark. So she says that the eagle, um, the bird that's able to see things from a really high perspective can see, the whole view of high as a bird can go, let's say. And this represents that more practical look on astrology. The eagle is like being able to be really good at the skills of astrology.
Mm.
But the eagle by itself, able to see everything, doesn't really have the, let's say, details and the nuances and that kind of creative spark that's needed to kind of interpret things, really. And that's where she says we need the lark. So the lark is the bird that's very beautiful with its song. It sings beautifully. It does not fly very high. In fact, it doesn't fly very well, but it's amazing at singing and yeah, just a beautiful bird. So she says the best situation is if you can get the lark and the eagle. So you want the eagle to get you as high as you can with the bedrock of the practical aspects or the scientific aspects of astrology. But we want the lark to be on top of the eagle. That's the most beautiful thing because now you're able to lift up that lark, that nuance, which she'd say is the intuition, to be able to see, so to use the tool of astrology in the most broadest way possible, but then also combine that with the intuition. So that's what I try to do is, obviously the skill of astrology is something I can always get better at through practice, like learning, doing more readings, in terms of the actual practical aspects of it. But I'm also doing my best to develop my intuition, which is something that doesn't come from study, in the sense of like learning more about the fundamentals of astrology itself. And I don't know where it comes from, but it is very creative. It's why she says that astrology is both a science and an art. So we want to combine these two things together. And that's what I try to do is to try to be as scientific as possible, keep it all very grounded, make sure that, my intuition doesn't just run amok and just go wherever. Everything needs to be within the confinements of what I know are the tools of astrology. But then within those confinements, yeah, I have to let that intuition go. Otherwise, it becomes very stale, very boring, very much like that eagle without the lark. And
Right.
yeah, so that's where I try to, really, keep things. But yeah, trying to remove myself from the equation as much as possible in that sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
yeah.
I guess we can have a little taste of this because I was asking you
Mhm.
beforehand if there are any things going on in the sky that would be good for us to know about or interesting for us to have consideration around. And one of the things you mentioned is the upcoming retrograde, Mars going into retrograde. So could you explain a bit about this energy and how that we may interact with that like in a collective sense?
Yeah, totally. So Mars is going retrograde for everybody. So just to make it clear, so the only real difference between tropical and sidereal is the signs.
Mhm.
So in both tropical and sidereal, Mars is going to go retrograde. But Mars will be retrograde here December 6th through February 24th. Now, where the sidereal interpretation comes in is that it's a different sign. So in tropical, it's in Leo, which deals with self-expression, and with sidereal, it's in Cancer, which deals with more about emotional, so creating a protective environment for ourselves and others. So fundamentally, across tropical and sidereal, Mars retrograde is going to be a time to go back and re-examine who we are and what we want. Okay, so a lot of the things that we've been really involved with, we could say for Really, I mean, you could say the past 2 years,
Mm,
because Mars's cycle is a 2.5 year cycle, roughly. And anytime we have a retrograde, it's about going back to some degree about all the things that we've moved forward for that time period. So, for example, like Mercury goes retrograde, but Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year. So we're kind of always just kind of redoing the past few months. Whereas now Mars goes retrograde. Mars is retrograde the least out of all the planets. And he only goes retrograde, like I said, once every 2.5 years,
mhm,
roughly. So it becomes quite significant. So it's a time of reflecting on the past 2 years of where have you been putting your energy? What have you set out to be your goals? What is it that's, motivates you? What is it you've set out to do? What is it you desire? What is it you want? Mars is that fire. It's that proactive part of ourselves. It's what we want. It's, the ego in the more physical sense of really wanting to get things in life and pursue the things we want in life. But to do that, we have to connect with ourselves, right? Like, we don't know what we want unless we know ourselves. We don't know where we can put our energy unless we know ourselves. And so anytime a planet goes retrograde, now it becomes a more internal process. So from December 6th through February 24th, I think it's going to be a very important time collectively to go in and reassess who we are and what we want. Be okay with things that um, you have to go back and redo. Goals, maybe places you put your energy in more recent months, probably that need to be redone, reflected on, again, in the context of who you are and what you want. Collectively, we could see, I don't know if you want to get all like geopolitical and stuff, but Mars is also the planet of like governments wanting things and pursuing things and things like this too. So we could see some things involving that assertiveness that, Mars is kind of the collective fire too, like war and things like that. I'm not saying there's going to be war with
yeah.
retrograde, but we've seen a lot of this activity. So things like that going back to be reconnected with. So in this case, renegotiated, reestablished. And so being very flexible, I think collectively in the sense of who we are and what we want, but also collectively in a sense of where has the collective what are the collective needs of each nation or the world at large? Where have those been going recently? And how can we now use this time to reflect on that, reestablish these things, and redo them in many ways? And then we'll notice a lot more of that energy starting to move forward again once we get to late February and even a few months after that, after Mars starts to build up his momentum there.
Yeah.
So just that's going to be in Cancer. So in tropical, it's going to be about what we love with Leo. So it's going to be self-expression. With sidereal, it's going to be more about who and what's important to us emotionally in
Mhm.
life. So that'll be the difference there between tropical and sidereal. But that's a very
Well,
important event we have coming up.
well, it's a beautiful, again, description. That's why I say I enjoy your videos so much. But the reason I like hearing these things, I would say, is not so much that I'm a person concerned with like prediction. I don't know that I really am, as much as I love the way that these energies or understanding them give us permission or give us understanding around why different energies may shift for us. So, this is something I was telling my friend the other day. For example, with what you described, say this energy does give us kind of a pause where we may have been moving forward with whatever these different themes are. And now all of a sudden it feels like we're taking 2 steps back. We would often maybe resist that or judge ourselves of like, why is this not forward moving now? But with understanding what you said, I think it gives a lot of us then this understanding of like, oh, well, with this current shift, it makes sense that maybe things are kind of uh, just feeling different. It doesn't feel as forward moving as perhaps it felt before, but it gives us an opportunity, as you say, to be more reflective before the forward motion goes again. So I really want to
Yeah.
thank you for explaining it the way that you did. Um,
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah, I,
Yeah. And
I,
just to build on that, like, um, that is so important to even have a period where we go back and re-edit things, you know what I
mhm,
mean? So like even with goals and things like this, if we were always moving forward in life, I mean, we would just burn out or can get
Yeah.
confused. And so yeah, so it's a time now to like maybe even take a step back, take a breather, maybe reflect on some things, and also go back and re-edit things. So like, anything that needed to be done before can now be redone too. But yeah, thanks for saying that because that's I think very important is that we're utilizing the energy in I think the most constructive way possible. And I think that that's the most constructive way of utilizing a retrograde, is being
Yeah.
flexible, being adaptive, being open-minded like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know I don't have much time with you. It goes by so quick. But I just wanted to ask you of the other two that you mentioned, if you could quickly, whichever one you think might be more prominent, you mentioned Saturn moving into Pisces around March, but also Jupiter being in Gemini around June. Of those two, is there one you would prefer to tell us about or?
Yeah, no, totally. So these are sidereal specific.
Mhm.
So for those that are into the tropical, already know you would know that in mainstream that Saturn's in Pisces in tropical, but Saturn's going to be going into Pisces in sidereal, and that's going to be around the late February, early March time of next year. So Saturn's been in Aquarius the past 2 years. It's funny in sidereal, the moment Saturn went into Aquarius was when all this like AI stuff started coming out
Oh.
and this is really what started now is really 29 years. So Saturn's 29 years cycle. And if we go back to like the early to mid 90s when Saturn came into Aquarius sidereally, then that's really what the birth of the internet was with chat and like email and all this stuff really started to ramp up there in the early to mid 90s, like 94 is when Saturn went into Aquarius. So what that means is we're kind of now completing now at Saturn's leaving Aquarius. Okay, we completed the infancy birthing phase of this 29 years with technology in the sense that, okay, the internet, I think, is like maxed out in the sense of how we've been using it. That's what the previous 29 years was about. With social media now and all this is like in terms of the way we built it in the early 90s, that's like maxed out.
Mm.
Now what we're starting is a new seed for the next 29 years in the way that we'll utilize technology. So that's going to be like 29 years from now, we'll probably just be directly interfacing with the AI and stuff like that. It's very obvious now that that's what the seeds are.
Right.
So look back at like the last 2 years of what started technologically or even collectively, not just with technology, but all collective things. These are actually the seeds for the next 29 years, actually. So that's quite significant with Saturn. Now Saturn going into Pisces on a personal level, this is like really good for the next 3 years to really work on our mental health and our spiritual health. Basically, Saturn's where we can put in time, patience, and perseverance, and putting that into more rest, more sleep, or just more spiritual activities, anything that's going to directly contribute to our mental health, well-being, less stress, things like this. Um, Clearing addictions as well. That's usually really good too. So we can start to see this collectively too. So hopefully we see some of the, like you're saying, some of the positive things of this, the constructive things I think would be like maybe we can, really start to help maybe the homeless situation in the
Mm.
world, maybe the drugs. I think the big one, I don't know yet because Saturn hasn't entered yet, but we're going to get a really good sense of this next year. But I think a big one collectively will be really helping those with drug issues, both on the street and of course with big pharma and things like
Mhm.
this. So I think that's going to be a big one over the next few years. We could see a new wave with art and creativity, as Pisces does tend to emphasize the more dreamy, creative, intuitive, and of course with spiritual practices and things like this becoming even more prominent during these next few years. So these kinds of things, Pisces is the spiritual, etheric, intuitive, creative sort of energy that now Saturn's going to start to build and work with. Yeah, the other one's more of a kind of a faster paced thing. Jupiter, he changes sign every year, but he's going to go into Gemini in June. And so that's going to start a year of starting to expand more of the Gemini energy. So Gemini is about learning, communication. What I was saying earlier about, my ascendant, just kind of learning, curiosity, interest, sharing, exchanging information. So it'll be a great time to do more of that. But since Jupiter is more of an abstract planet, we can think of Gemini as more like the left brain. So communication is left brain, mathematics, science, things that basically are about forming concepts and structure with our thoughts. whereas Jupiter is more like abstract. So Jupiter's like philosophy and spirituality and the meaning of life and all this more abstract stuff. So this actually tends to be quite grounding when we see this. And so we could tend to see like these things starting to work very well together, being able to take very practical things in life and make them into things that are like more expansive. So like, turning in, philosophy, some sort of ideas into practical form, some sort of philosophies into tangible form. Being able to have both the bigger picture and the practical view, I think in a good sense of balance, with this Jupiter. And then collectively, we could see expansion in the realms of communication, personally, collectively, technologically, things that deal with exchanging with others, business, trade, negotiations, things like this tend to be quite prominent. As you can see, the description here is more minor than Saturn just because Jupiter's speed, and Jupiter tends to be more where we kind of have opportunities, whereas Saturn's more of what we're building. But this is the combination, let's say, that starts in June, is that of building and working on things for good mental and spiritual health for ourselves and collectively, but at the same time, a curiosity to learn, a curiosity to communicate, a curiosity to exchange with others as well. So it's actually these two constellations square each other. They're very different from one another. So Saturn and Jupiter will be squaring each other, which is meaning a bit of a tension just because they're very different. But it's really during squares that they become very constructive. So
Mhm.
I like the square because it's like, okay, how can we do all this spiritually soul-fulfilling stuff for us? And at the same time make it very practical and very applicable or just conceptual with the Gemini too. So I think it's going to be a very constructive time
I
collectively.
mean, it sounds like it. Honestly, the way that you describe both, they both kind of sound like almost this marriage between or giving structure to the formless. And you think about Saturn and what that energy is like, and then you think about Pisces. Again, it sounds like kind of this marriage between structure and formlessness. And then the same with you're saying with Jupiter and with Gemini. It's like, oh, it's kind of anyway, they
Yeah.
have a little bit of a similar flavor. They're very, very interesting. But I have to say,
Mm.
Athen, I'm very thankful for this conversation with you, and I'm sure many other people will be as well. I learned a lot in this hour, so that always excites me. But could you tell us a bit about? I know that you said you look at astrology from that lens of our life path and how to apply what it is that our imprint or our tendencies and whatever is coming up for us at soul level. So could you talk about how people can work with you? And then also if you could share your YouTube channel so people can check out your weekly readings as well.
Yeah, totally. So everything's at Mastering the Zodiac. If you Google Mastering the Zodiac or search engine, and on the website there is the weeklies. We have courses, we have readings. So basically software as well. So basically anything you could think of astrologically, we have it there from the true sidereal perspective. But what I do want to invite everyone to do is, if you do go to the website again, Mastering the Zodiac, you'll see on the top right there's a little button that says "View your signs" or "View your true signs." Um, Click that. It's a chart calculator and just type in your birth details. You'll see this guy exactly when you were born. Again, the signs are going to be very different from tropical, so be prepared for that. But we do have a mini report describing what that is. So, like when we're talking about these different signs and stuff, you'll be able to see that description there and just see if it resonates. We also have the sky view, so you can see the exact placements of the planets when you're born. So, if you don't believe us or you want to, by all means, please verify it using a planetarium as well, where you could see it visibly in the sky. But we have that planetarium there, so you can see exactly what it looked like when you were born, exactly where the sun was, the moon was, and all that. Read the mini report, see if it resonates, see if it helps you on your journey at the moment. And if it does, I can offer your audience a 50% discount on the full report. So you have the link for that. I guess it'll be
Yes.
down in the description below. And go from there. Start first, just seeing if it resonates with you. If you want to learn more about True Sidereal, we have resources there as well. And then if it does, I would recommend the report, which is a 15-page printout of that personality stuff, that life path stuff that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, it is very detailed, I will say. have mine from you. Thank you very much. And again, it is just interesting having another lens of understanding. And I appreciate again the way that you help us understand how we can appreciate both the tropical and the sidereal and what those differences were. So this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming, Athen. For everyone listening, the link for the report and to have that discount is down in the show description, but also go to Athen's website, masteringthezodiac.com. Be sure to also check them out on YouTube, and we'll see you all very soon. Thank you so much, Athen.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. It was great.
Okay, beautiful alchemist. I want to first of all thank Athen again for coming to give us some insight and understanding about sidereal or true sidereal astrology. Don't forget, you can look up your chart right now on his website, masteringthezodiac.com. And if you want the full report, there is a discount for us, and you can just use the link down in the show description to get that today. I will say, he did send me a copy of my full report, and it does read very differently than any report I have had from Western tropical astrology. So it does. I understand now what he was saying about that soul level expression and how that's how he sees these kinds of readings and what they focus on. It definitely does read that way. So it did give me a different lens than the Western and tropical astrology has. So hopefully you get some insights and understanding, some clarity about your path as well. If you want to work with Athen, you can also get that information on his website, masteringthezodiac.com. I also recommend, if you are someone that likes looking at the energies of the week, check out his YouTube channel where he does weekly collective predictive updates based on this true sidereal astrology as well. So, just a reminder again, if you want to join me in the Alchemy Circle, now is the time to register, because as a member, there is also a workbook that you will receive from me by mail that corresponds with the first class we will have that begins at the end of December. So, again, if it's something you're thinking about, go ahead, register right away. And I welcome you into the Alchemy Circle already. I look forward to working with all of you throughout the year of 2025. There's so much that we're going to explore. And yeah, it's one of my favorite things. So I hope you all have a gorgeous day. I will see you soon. And remember to always journey in love.